Okay, everyone. It is July 30th, 2025, and this is part two of my two-part answer to the question about what makes 8 billion a magical number for us demographic and fertility wonks. And as I said in my prior video, there's nothing magical about it, and that's really not the goal. The goal is not maintaining a population at 8 billion. It has to do with demographic structure of the population. So in the last one I talked about the social welfare model and how it is ultimately doomed under our current demographic situation, and we're going to start in the United States feeling that doom in 7 to 8 more years, and in 10 to 15 years, it's going to be just smacking us in the face over and over again. Um, and again, this is largely dyed in the wool at this point. By and large, it's unavoidable at this point. So let's go to the economic side of it. There are two basic forces in modern economics that make everything work: supply, demand. Well, supply, think of production; demand, think of consumption. Okay, so let's start with the supply side. This is what most people are worried about: is the idea that as populations shrink in nations like China, Japan, South Korea, Russia, Taiwan, and others, Canada, um, that what will happen is we won't have enough workers to make enough stuff. This is a problem, to be certain. People who say this are not wrong, but it's not as bad as they think it is. Automation, new technology, AI, that's going to certainly help with a lot of this stuff. Um, but we have the other the other side of the coin is the real problem, which is the consumption side. Basically, there are two major phases in your life as a consumer. Your first one is you have finished school and you have entered the workforce. You're a young person, you are earning some money, you are spending every penny you've got. You're buying beer, you're buying pizza, you're renting an apartment, you're trying to buy some clothes, you're trying to buy some cheap pots and pans, you need a bath mat, stuff like that. You don't have a lot to spend, but you're spending everything you've got. You're actually a pretty good consumer at this point. You're generating a fair amount of demand. Generally cheaper products, but you're doing it. As your worker phase continues, you're going to start entering that kind of middle age. You're going to hit 35, you're going to hit 38, 40, somewhere around then. You're making a lot more money. Now you're buying nicer stuff. You're buying a house, you've bought a car, you're buying real furniture, you're buying the really nice set of pots and pans, you're buying the Egyptian cotton towels. The stuff you used to all go to Bed Bath and Beyond to get before it went out of business. I missed that store. You're buying the $180 knife block instead of the $49.95 one. That kind of thing. You are now doing a ton of consumption. You are spending a lot of money. You're buying a lot of cool stuff. This is great. This is keeping the factories going. It's keeping the trucks rolling and the ships sailing. Everything is happening because you are making it happen. You're buying it. You're running that AC in summer because you can afford it. So you're paying for the power plant and so forth and so on. You're taking the vacation. So you're paying for the airlines and for the sandals resorts and all that kind of stuff. That's where I am right now. That is the peak of the consumption phase of the consumption phase of your life. This generally starts to wind down somewhere in the 45 to 50 range, and you begin devoting more and more of your income to saving for retirement. You're now entering the savings phase of life. You're still doing a fair amount of consumption. You're still a pretty good consumer, but by and large, you're spending a lot more money on 401k, money market. You're trying to pay down the mortgage debt, things like that. Getting ready for retirement. Enter the second major phase of your life. And now I'm overusing the word phase here. So the first one is consumption, and we've kind of done the start out, the peak, and then the wind down. Now you've entered the retirement section. Your consumption drops off a cliff. You've got all your furniture, you've got your house, you've got your car, you've got a full wardrobe full of clothing, you've got a TV, you got it all. You will still buy some things in your life. Things will break, they will need to be replaced, you'll move. But by and large, the big I need to go out and buy everything because I don't own anything phase is long over. You're just not spending that much. The other thing is you're going to be a lot more careful with your purchases because you're now probably on fixed income or retirement income. You no longer have the ability to generate more and more revenue to pay more and more stuff. So you're just trying to get rid of your debts at this point, cut your cost of living, and achieve financial security for the time you have left. This is a huge problem in modern economics because it means that the factories you don't buy enough stuff to keep the factories going. You don't eat enough food to keep the farms going. It's hard to keep the trucks rolling and the ships sailing because there's not a lot of product that needs to be moved. There's not a lot of product being bought. Now there is one exception to this, which is healthcare spending. Senior citizens consume an enormous amount of healthcare resources. But outside of that field, they don't spend very much. They are mostly protecting their resources so that they can, make sure they have a roof over their head, the lights turn on, and they have food on their plate for the remainder of their life. But they do this at a reduced level than what they were doing prior to retirement. So, why, as I've kind of, I think, laid out the problem. So, the fertility issue is that we have problems on the production side because we're not going to have enough workers. But the bigger issue is we're going to have a problem on the demand side. We don't have enough people to consume the demand. Factories get more and more automated, they get more and more efficient, transportation networks get more and more efficient. We can produce more and more stuff and transport more and more stuff for less and less money, but now we have fewer customers. This is a problem at a global scale, and it is hitting the major manufacturing countries right now. China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Germany, Russia, Italy, all of them have this problem. And Russia chose a completely different solution, which is the Ukraine war, and it's an effing disaster for them. But everybody else came up with the same solution. We'll export. We'll just keep producing all the stuff, and we'll just export it. And this is why things in America have gotten so cheap for the last several years. Well, I know we had the inflation surge, but perhaps prior to that was all these major manufacturing countries were thinking we have to export. Who was the one country who had a huge cohort of young professionals who could buy it all? The United States, because we have the millennials. And so the United States was the solution. But here's the problem. Well, here's a couple of problems. One, this issue of not enough consumers to match production is spreading to more and more countries. It is coming to Turkey and Brazil and Mexico and Vietnam and Indonesia and India. It is coming to more countries after that. It's not hitting them all right now. Some of them, like a place like India, it's going to be decades before it hits them, but it's coming to all of them. As all of them are having major fertility declines. So what we've got is a global population that's getting older and older and older. That is going to, on a per capita basis, consume less and less and less over time. I'm not saying right now, although it has happened in the countries I listed right now, like I said, like China, Japan, South Korea, Germany, Italy. None of them can consume what they produce, or anywhere close to it. So they're all having to become massive exporters. And so there is a fight right now for the American market because we're the only market that has even a prayer of absorbing all of this stuff. And this is why China is slashing prices like crazy, is because they have to keep sales going to the United States. So problem number one, demographic, we cannot buy enough stuff to keep the economies going, not long term. Next couple of years, not a problem. 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, massive, gigantic, huge problem. Second problem, Donald Trump. Donald Trump has showed up and he's told Americans that tariffs are something that are paid by foreigners and it's all just profit for the Americans. Completely false, but people believe it. The United States as an export market is becoming closed off, which means that the solution that every country out there came up with, which is just export all our stuff and we'll target America as our primary market, is no longer a viable solution. We have no solution to this problem now. So Goldman Sachs put out a report several months ago that there is, I think, 1% of steel mills in China were profitable at this point. And you've seen similar things for cement, for copper, for all kinds of manufacturing. The Chinese government is paying money hand over fist to keep their businesses running because they cannot export the volume of material they need to at a price that would produce even break-even margins for them without massive government subsidies. So the Chinese economic model is doomed. I mean, really doomed. Strictly on demographic grounds alone. Now, there's a lot of other problems they're facing, too much debt and globalization breaking down, all that kind of stuff, competent leadership from Beijing. But I'm just saying, if all of that was fine, the demographics, they're screwed. Germany has the same problem. Japan has the same problem. South Korea has the same problem. Taiwan has the same problem. Italy has the same problem. Holy crap, that's like 50% of global manufacturing. Russia has the same problem, but they've gone and gotten all their young men killed in Ukraine and made their problem 10 times worse. This problem is coming to the United States, by the way. It will get here as the millennials begin to age out of their peak consumption and they go into wind down consumption mode, which is starting basically next year. Now note, I said starting. I didn't say what happened. It will take many years for this process to complete itself for the millennials, probably 15 to 18 years, something like that. So figure 2040, 2042 before it's done. And at that point, the United States has a huge problem on our hands. So the point is, our global economic model is predicated on a certain demographic structure that we have always had in history, because the fact is old people just didn't live that long and new babies were born constantly. We now have very few babies being born and old people living way longer than ever. By the way, I understand I'm going to be one of those old people in just a few more years. I'm not that far away from it. So yes, I'm very aware of that fact. We don't have an economic model anymore that works. Not long term. For 2, 3, 4 years, sure, we can figure that out. 15, 20 years from now, we have no model for that at all. And I really want to emphasize this. I'm not saying the model won't work very well or it'll become less efficient. It doesn't work, period. Nobody's figured out how to solve this. So for us, fertility wonks, if you're wondering why we're worried about it, to recap, our social welfare spending model is going to collapse in the next several years. Our global economic model is going to die in less than 20 years, maybe less than 15 years. And we don't have a solution. Nobody does. Because, by the way, there was a solution for the welfare model, inflate our way out of it. That doesn't work for this one. It just doesn't. Even with inflation, you simply cannot get a smaller and smaller population to eat the same amount of bread or drink the same amount of milk or use the same amount of gasoline or buy the same number of shoes. So it's just not going to work. And I have no idea what we're going to do about it.